remember it was such a dark time because I felt so far away from the Lord, and I was questioning who he was. I was questioning his compassion and his sovereignty. I was questioning that he was even good. Towards the end of 2015, I had been praying and asking the Lord. I felt like there was transition coming, but I didn't really know exactly what it was, and was just praying and asking the Lord what that looked like. I'd previously been on the field, and always knew that I would go back. I just didn't know the time frame. And in the process of praying and asking the Lord what that looked like, I also started asking, where do I go and who do I go with? So I knew about FAI because of Anna and I from the same home church, and I've been on the mission executive team at my church, and so I knew FAI from the beginning when they first formed. And so that felt like a natural fit because I already knew who they were. So just in praying and meeting with my pastor, decided to contact Dalton and see if there was a place in FAI. At the time, I thought I'd be going to Kurdistan, and that was where I had my focus, was Kurdistan. As I was praying, some friends came through Columbus that were moving here, and we met. And while we were meeting, they just asked if I would consider coming to Cyprus. In my mind, there were like these obstacles that I was seeing. I'm like, okay, Lord, there's these hurdles in the way, and every hurdle that I brought to the Lord, it was like he just wiped it out of the way. And the path was so straight and clear for me to come here. Yeah, I didn't really know exactly what I was going to be doing, but knew that it would have something to do with human trafficking, since that was what I was already working in counter trafficking in the States. And it was something that a burden the Lord had put on my heart for a long time. So I got here, landed on January the 12th of 2017, and 6 days later, I got a call from home that my nephew, who was 35 at the time, had committed suicide. Our family, we've never experienced anything really tragic or traumatic. It was the first thing that we had experienced and that we were walking through that was, it was just really hard and really, really traumatic for us. Chadwick is my sister's son, and my focus when I got back to the States was her. Let me focus on my sister and really help her walk through the tragedy of losing her son, and in such a tragic way. So I was, the whole time I was there, it was to be a support. And then I was there for about 2.5 weeks. When I returned back to the field is when it really hit me, the grief and the loss of losing Chadwick. And then I was here without my family. So going through grief and pain and the loss of that without having the support system of my family. And I had a really strong support system back home. My family and I are really close, and I had a strong support system with my church. And then I found myself in a place where I didn't know anybody yet, and it was winter, it was cold, it gets dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's like all of these things that are really hard. And I just remember sitting and thinking, what am I doing here? I could be on a plane. I could be back home with my family, and it wouldn't even matter. It wouldn't matter to the people that are here that I would actually feel justified in going home and being with my family in such a tragic time. I remember it was such a dark time because I felt so far away from the Lord, and I was questioning who He was. I was questioning His compassion and His sovereignty. I was questioning that He was even good. And I'd never been in that place before where I questioned who He was and questioned His character. It's always been such a strong part of who I am to stand for God's character and who He is and to speak rightly about the Lord. And I found myself in a place where I couldn't do that. I knew that I had to get out of that place because I was just going to go deeper if I didn't. And so I was actually sitting here, and it was one evening, and I just was like, Lord, I don't know. I can't get myself out of this. And I don't know what's real and what's true right now. And I did say I could just go home and it would be okay. And then I was like, I immediately just said, no, I can't go home. Because it was so evident that He brought me here. And life circumstances had changed, and it was really hard. But He didn't change. And His calling for me to be here didn't change. So I knew that I couldn't just leave. I just knew I had to, even though I didn't feel that God was good, and I was having a hard time believing those things about Him, I knew if I didn't say them out loud, that I wouldn't come out of the dark place that I felt that I was in. And so I just sat and I just said, the only thing I was just, God, You're good. And I just said it over and over and over again until I believed You really are good. And so from that point on, there was a difference, and there was a shift in how I was dealing with my grief. Up until that point, I was dealing with it with blaming the Lord and being very disappointed in Him. And from that point on, my grief shifted to where I was actually just grieving the loss of my nephew, and also acknowledging that God is still who He says He is, and He doesn't change. That it doesn't matter what circumstances happen, that nothing changes His word and nothing changes His character. And then April of 2018, I got a call. It's about 2 a.m. My sister called and said that my brother was in a car accident and that he didn't make it. And with my brother, because of who he was and his character and the way he loved the Lord and the way he loved our family, it was a huge hole in her family. So again, that was just like, we can't be doing this again. We can't be going through another tragedy so close together. And so I went back home for his funeral and stayed for about a month. And came back to Cyprus, and this time the grief was different. It was it was a huge loss for us, but my heart had been so healed from Chad, and knowing who God was had been reinforced in me, because I had to come face to face with what do I believe and what do I not believe about the Lord. And then when my brother died, it was easier to see, and I could say, Lord, You're still good, and you're compassionate, and You're sovereign, and nothing about You has changed. And I could say it and believe it without having a struggle of trying to believe that. It's hard when you're going through grief and have tragedy, but when you're on the mission field and your family is still back and they're together and they go through these things together, and you feel removed from that, and the grief is different, and the pain is different because you're going through it alone, and there are people around. The Lord gives us family where we go, but there's still an element of it. They can't fully understand what it feels like to have that loss, and it feels even greater when you're away from your family. While going through the grief, and it was really hard to serve, and It was hard to even want to leave my apartment most days and to be around other people. But I knew that I was here for that reason, and I knew that it didn't change anything about the Lord and what He had called me to do. And it also, I felt like the Lord gave me more compassion for people and what it looks like to have such pain and to come from such brokenness. And I felt like I could relate more to people who were in that place of loss, great loss, regardless of whether it's a loss because they've been put into a situation of trafficking, or if it's a loss because they have endured war and terror and those kind of things. But there was a greater level of compassion where I could sit and I could say, I know what loss feels like. What I tell people who are wanting to come and join my team when I talk to them, and I ask them, what are you going to do when life doesn't turn out like you think it should? You know, how are you going to respond when there's disappointment? And how are you going to respond when bad things happen? And when you experience things that are painful, or if you experience loss while you're on the field, how are you going to respond to that? And right now is the time to think about those things and to ask the Lord to build in you the things that you're going to need to sustain you down the road. To know that I'm going because of this, and all of these peripheral things don't matter. That I'm going because of this reason, because Jesus is worth it, because He has said to go, and I'm going to be obedient in that. And it doesn't matter what happens, what circumstances come up, or what life changes happen, that stay the course because He's worthy. And to go ahead and decide that now, and not when you're in the midst of the trial. Just thinking of some of my heroes who have walked this trail before us is a lot of the early pioneers in missions, Hudson Taylor, Amy Carmichael, those who they endured great loss and more than we have, and still continue to press forward and still continue to press into the Lord and what He had asked them to do. And that just like them, it's the same with us. It's really none of this is nothing in me. There's nothing about me that makes me really press on. You know, it's that foundation and the relationship with the Lord and the Holy Spirit that speaks to those places deep in us that says, keep moving, keep going, keep pressing in, because He's worth it. Yeah, and He's sufficient, and I think that's the thing I've learned the most through this is the sufficiency of the Lord. That regardless of what happens, He is so sufficient, and He is worth everything that we can give Him because of what He did. And there's no suffering and there's no trials or tribulation that we will go through that will ever compare to what He did. And that's why He's worth it.